Hello all. In this part 3 of my table saw build, I'll be setting up the fence. The standard form of table saw fences follows the Beezemar style in that you have a rail on which a T-section at the end of the fence is cinched with a locking lever, truing the rail as it tightens. Tried and tested, and the road I was going to go down, but when I saw this one on the Banggood site, it appealed for a couple of reasons which I'll get into later. I should say though that Banggood did let me pick this one out and sent it to me for review. As always though, I'll be giving my honest thoughts on it, covering what I like and anything I don't. An accurate solid fence is fundamental to a good table saw, so I wouldn't have it any other way. Where this fence differs mainly is that it runs in two T-tracks, one wider to include the steel measuring rule. In this piece of track, a bar like those on mitre gauges acts to keep the fence true, having the same sort of split rings to remove any slop between the bar and track. The other track just has a locking bracket with a sliding T-nut. Now this is a comprehensive kit comprising all the fixings, including a couple of spares and the tools needed for assembly. But there were no instructions, so I'm going to run through putting it together. The brackets with the sliding bar and the sliding T-nut fix to plates which mount to the fence profile. The holes for the screw heads are countersunk and self-locate, so nice and easy. The mounting plates come with the screws and T-nuts already in place to slide onto the fence. When sliding the fence on, you have to remember to sandwich the plate with a cross member that forms a triangle for rigidity. There's a block on the back of the sliding bar on the left for one end of the cross member. This being in a fixed position does mean there's a minimum width apart you can have the track, somewhere around the 350 to 400mm mark I think. The fence being 800mm long, you could probably have the tracks up to 700mm apart. I think there's potential there for them to be added to a small site table saw perhaps. The cross member and its bracket on the back of the fence will let you know where they need to be. You get a handle to mount to the crossbar if you want it. I'd advise getting the screws through the holes in the handle first before putting in position, as the holes in the handle are deep and dropping a screw in there after the fact will make things difficult to locate. You also get a couple of caps to finish the handle off. Lovely. The movement in the track is nice, and on the table here it seems to lock down good and firm. Here I'm routing out the channels for the track. I mentioned in part 1 of this series, but worth repeating. When you measure and lay out for your channels, it's best to use one edge as a datum. The tracks need to be parallel, so to minimise risk of any deviation, both channels were measured from the edge nearest me. Use the same measuring device for each too, be that a tape measure or rule. This will keep things consistent and the tracks parallel. And thankfully the channels were pretty spot on and with their tops flush to the table. If you find you've overdone the routing a little bit and the tracks sit a bit low, just use a bit of filler to bring them up to flush, leaving it to dry before fixing down obviously. So with the fence slid into the tracks, it's time to look at adjustments. There are 3 split rings in the bar which you can adjust to remove slop. There's 2 brass thumb screws for adjusting the cursor or measurement indicator. And on the mounting plates there are 4 grub screws per side which give you plenty of scope for dialing in the fence to the tabletop and blade. So with the split rings in my bar already adjusted, I'm going to set the fence square. Here it looks like the fence is perfectly square to the table out of the box, but the knobs for locking to the track are loose. If I do them up, you should just be able to see the slight rocking in the square now. There's a tiny gap toward the top of the fence. Obviously when you use the fence, it will be with it locked down, so make all adjustments to the fence with the mounting blocks locked into the track. With all the fixing screws in the back of the fence slackened off, including the middle one for the crossbar, I just ease the upper grub screws in to push the top of the fence out a little to meet the square. And I place the square directly behind the grub screw I'm adjusting. With all the grubs adjusted, the screws on the fixing plates can be tightened back down. Then it's time for a recheck. This may need doing a few times to get dead on, but I'm happy the fence is square to the table here. Next, checking parallel to the blade. It's just a hair off with a very slight gap between the teeth at the rear of the blade, but this will make adjustment easy. This again is why I say it's best to lay out everything from the same reference edge. It minimises issues down the line. As the adjustment needed is just a fraction, I can use the play in the screw holes for the crossmember to eliminate it. With the crossmember loose and the locking knobs, I flush the fence to the blade using the available slack, and then lock everything back down. If I were out by a millimetre or more, it would be a case of using the grub screws I showed earlier, a much trickier process as you'd have to dial in parallel and square at the same time. With the fence just kissing the blade and everything square, I can set the indicator to 0, then lock it down. Then that's it, dialed in and ready to cut. As it comes out of the box, the tracks are good for a 750mm cut capacity. I've cut mine down a little to fit my table, so my max is about 680mm. I'm not going to go mad with demo cuts, as the fence and saw will feature in a lot of upcoming vids, just cutting a couple of 575mm panels for a unit. One really obvious thing you notice when cutting with this fence is due to its dual locking, it's rock solid, no discernible flex along its length at all, very reassuring to push against. So thankfully both my panels were exactly the same size, having gone through the saw, exactly 575 each end of the panel. I think it looks a little over in this close-up, but I'd say that's due to the bend in the tape you can see as I struggle to get the shot with the camera between my head and hands. Flipped around, the cut edge appears nice and square to the factory edge at the bottom of the shot. Obviously the fence doing what a fence should. So at the time of making this vid, these fences are on offer for £102 down from £129 on Banggood, and that's with free 1-week shipping. As always, I'll leave a link in the description. It's a good value kit, and if they hadn't agreed to send it to me, I would have bought it anyway, to be honest. I'm not disappointed at all. It's well made with a substantial piece of profile, lots of adjustment, a good array of fixings, accessories and assembly tools, and it's dual locking, so absolutely no flex. Now, running on tracks like it does probably means keeping an eye on dust build-up to keep things accurate and free moving. This is probably something to consider. I think I'll have to upgrade to a magnifying cursor too, though that's less the fence's fault and more mine for still not getting myself off for an eye test. Aside from the dual locking, this fence running in tracks appealed for this build as I plan to use the same tracks for the upcoming router table. A two birds deal if you like. So leaving it there, I think that about wraps it up. It's a bit of a different fence this, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Also happy to answer any questions below. Thanks for watching.